Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Welcome to our special, the global trade war. Or maybe there won't be a global trade war. That's the question. We're told there will be one. There will definitely be one. Trump, that trade warmonger. Or maybe Trump will get the upper hand in every trade battle and there won't be a war. Maybe what happened to the president of Colombia in his first week of office might be a sign of what's to come. Just to refresh your memory on this, it was the very first week of Trump's presidency. 2 planes full of illegal alien criminals, Colombian citizens of Colombia, who came into America illegally and committed more crimes. Put them on a plane to send back to Colombia. And the wacky president of Colombia, the Marxist wag, his name's Petro. This guy's crazy. He didn't want him. Said, no, we don't accept the flight. And Trump said, all right, fine. We're going to put a 25% tariff on all goods from Colombia. And if you do not comply within a week, we'll up it to 50%, among some other terms as well. He just knocked off that tweet on the golf course. And for like 20 minutes, the president of Colombia put up a fight. And he's like, oh yeah, we're going to put a 50% tariff on you. And then all the president's advisors got to him and said, these American tariffs will absolutely crush our economy. And the president of Colombia caved and the whole thing was over in like an hour. When Trump throws America's weight around and says we will no longer be taken advantage of, it's pretty much the end of it. So the question is, will every other country cave in the trade war like Colombia? Or is there any country who's strong enough to step up against us, against Trump, against the strongest economy and market in the world? And I believe now, in the beginning of America's golden age, only to get stronger. That's the question. Will there be trade wars? Or will all the other countries cave like Colombia? Now, let's back it up a minute here. Why are we even talking about trade war at all? Like what's happened? For a long time now, America's been sold out. And we've been sold out by our politicians. I think that's pretty obvious. We've also been sold out by other Americans in our country. That's what I want to talk about for a second because maybe it's a little less obvious. I was listening to an interview with Chamath. Chamath's a young guy. He made billions in his 20s and then lost billions. And he's like a bit of a reckoning of life right now. And he was making the point, actually we have the clip, I think we have the clip right here. Here's Chamath talking about not just being a businessman, but being an American businessman.
So I would say now that I'm 48, I'm much more aware of what does it mean to be an American? What is my job as an American businessman, as an engineer, as an entrepreneur? It's not all of this other superficial garbage because it adds nothing.
It's really interesting, this idea of being an American businessman. I never thought of that before. What an interesting concept. I'm not just a dad. I'm Jack's dad. I'm not just a husband. I'm my wife's husband. I'm Stephanie's husband. Right? Saying I'm just a husband doesn't really put any responsibility on me. But to say I'm her husband, it's like, oh, all right, I get it now. Now there's a direction. There's a recipient of my responsibility. There's a focus, right? That one qualifier of the noun can make all the difference. I'm an American businessman. Okay, what does that mean? Well, now I have an obligation to not just me and my family and my employees, but also to the country that I live in. And if more businessmen had that America first mindset, that American businessman mindset, we'd be in a very different place today. Because if you're an American businessman, of course you're not going to outsource your factory. That's not something an American businessman would do. Now, an interesting story is after World War II, we had a very intentional effort to build up other countries and build up the economies of other countries to counter communism. We wanted to see West Germany thrive so that we could show East Germany that communism was terrible, right? So we would build up Japan. We wanted to build up Japan. We had an incentive, a desire, an effort, an intentional effort to build up Japan to show the world that communism was bad. We built up Latin and South America to show Cuba that communism wasn't going to work. And maybe there was a noble intent behind that after the World War and during the Cold War, but over time we lost the plot. And we just kept doing it. We just kept building up other countries, all at the expense of the American business, the American people. Got a pretty relevant example here. When Trump was in the beginnings of this trade war with Colombia for like these 20 minutes, there were a lot of people on the left who came out and said, oh, this tariff on Colombian goods, that means the price of flour, the price of coffee is going to go up and the price of flowers are going to go up. Oh, it's terrible, right? Price of flowers. And I got to thinking, I was like, price of flowers? Like, isn't that weird? Like, why do we grow so many flowers in Colombia? When did that happen? 80% of our flowers are from Colombia. And I got to think, well, wait a second. I used to live in San Diego. And there's this area of San Diego, Carlsbad. And if you're driving up the highway, it's right on the coast. So you got the ocean, the 5, and then these fields, this hill with these fields. And they're called the Carlsbad flower fields, and they're beautiful. And on this hillside, during harvest time, it's all colorful and it's full of ranunculus. And I think, why are we getting our flowers in Colombia? Well, we were sold out. Early 1960s, a guy named Edgar Wells, a Colombian guy, went to DC and noticed that the flowers were a little expensive. He thought, you know what, I think we can do this for less money in my home country. Okay, that's fine, go do it, do your best. But it wasn't just that. In 1961, JFK started what he called the Alliance for Progress. The purpose of the Alliance for Progress was to build up Colombia. Purposely and specifically to build up Colombia. And specifically to build up Colombia to counter them growing cocaine. Also that, by the way, the largest or the most densely populated area of the capital of Colombia is called Ciudad Kennedy, after JFK. Also, 1961 was the beginning of the U.S. Agency for International Development. It's called USAID. Maybe you've heard a lot more about it recently, as Trump and Doge want to get rid of it. The very first task of USAID, the very first task was to try to develop a flower industry in Colombia. And they did it. That's why now we get 80-85% of our flowers from Colombia. So in that regard, mission accomplished. Now they still grow cocaine, but also it destroyed nearly all of the California and also Colorado flower industry. That's where we used to grow our flowers in America, California, Colorado. They're gone, they're out of business. Now it's just like a little novelty hill on the side of the road in San Diego. It used to be a thriving industry. Colombia has 130,000 people in their flower growing industry. Why don't we do it in America? We used to, not anymore. And there was an intentional effort by the left to outsource or to build up another country, but the effect was to get rid of the industry here in America. And now, here we are decades later, and we have Colombian rapists and murderers, but because flowers in Colombia might be a little more expensive, we have to keep those murderers and rapists and illegal aliens here. That's what the left is saying. Oh, we got to keep them here. We can't get in a trade war with Colombia because then the price of flowers will go up. Well, why is Colombia even growing flowers? Oh, that was you guys too, wasn't it? Now listen, my point is not that we need to repatriotize the flower industry in America or whatever, right? But this is what the left has done for a long time now. And the right too, I shouldn't just be blaming the left for this, I'm sorry. This is what a lot of people have done in this country for a long time. They've sold us out to other countries, and now those other countries have us over a barrel, all the way down to flowers. One other interesting cultural thing happened around the same time as well. After World War II, terrible, awful, of course, the intellectuals thought that World War II started because of nationalism. So to make sure that that never happens again, they went straight to the opposite of nationalism, which is globalism. Global governments, global authorities, global economies. And they believed that that would solve all of our problems and prevent a World War III. Well, there's a massive cost to that. This is also where we get the idea of multiculturalism. Diversity is our strength. It's not, of course. But this all ties into the intentional destruction of America first. And Trump is about getting that back. Trump is about getting America first, putting America first. Trump wants Greenland because it's best for America's national security. Trump wants the Panama Canal back because it's in America's best interest. Trump renamed Denali back to Mount McKinley because national symbols that reflect our history is actually very important. Trump wants to root out all the DEI nonsense because all of that is to tell people that America is not a good country. It's a poison that destroys whatever it touches. We got to root it out. Of course, deporting illegal aliens, because this is our country. That guy in Boston who beat his pregnant wife to death in the sight of his other child and was sentenced to life in prison in Boston, but was let out by the parole board after only 17 years. And ICE had to go get him in Trump's first week in office. What the heck is that guy doing here? That's not America first. He's from the Dominican Republic. What are we doing? It's high time we put America first. And we're doing it. It's a return to nationalism, a return to America first, because America is not just an idea, remember. We're an actual place. I'll never forget this World War II veteran at Trump's convention.
America, people say, America is an idea. But I believe America is much more than that. America is our home.
America's our home. It's a place you and I live. We're finally getting our mojo back. I want wonders to be built again. I want beautiful projects. I want monuments and statues and arches. I want things to be proud of. We have the Olympics, the World Cup, our 250th anniversary. Trump said he's going to beautify DC. We're going to do big projects. Look at these SpaceX launches, these videos of amazing, incredible things. This is all about celebrating America's greatness again. There's not been a single ticker tape parade for any individual in New York City since John Glenn in 1962. It's been a long time since we've celebrated greatness. We've been tearing down statues these last few years. Well, part of the American golden era is we bring them back, and then some. Part of the American golden era is telling these other countries that we will not be taken advantage of any longer. And Trump plans on using tariffs as a weapon to put America first once again. We'll chat about the implications of that with some experts next, right here on The First TV.
America is back and open for business. One thing we're going to be demanding is we're going to be demanding respect from other nations. We just want to be treated fairly with other nations because there's hardly a nation in the world, and I blame this on us and I blame it on politicians that for some reason, probably mostly it's stupidity, but you could also say other reasons, but mostly stupidity. They've allowed other nations to take advantage of the U.S., and we can't allow that to happen anymore.
I was to the World Economic Forum. Not enough has been said about the background that Trump uses there. Remember Biden had this background. He made like a made-up set. It was like a set of like a Lowe, like a Bush League Oval Office or something. It was like a pathetic. That's an awesome background for Trump to be speaking the truth to the world. And Mike Baker's here, the great Mike Baker, host of the President's Daily Brief. Mike, great to talk to you, brother. My first question is
thank you, man. And listen, before we get
is-
started, thank you for stepping in when I was overseas for the President's Daily Brief. Really appreciate that and got nothing but great feedback, and everybody loved you, almost loved you too much. So
no, that's not. I didn't want to put my best foot forward, Mike. You know what I mean? I didn't. No, it was my
I will
honor,
say the
brother.
only
Thank you
problem is you left the studio kind of cluttered with empty beer cans and empty bourbon bottles. But other than that, it was a great experience.
Listen, that's a small tax that you have to pay. That's no big deal, right? I got to leave some mark behind, right?
Right.
Thank you, brother. Thanks for letting me do it. How important is our foreign aid to other countries? And I guess the point of that question is, how much leverage do we really have over other countries?
Yeah, you know what? It's really horses for courses, right? By that I mean it depends on the country. It depends on the nature of the aid. It depends on the moment, right? Is it wartime aid? Is it humanitarian aid in a crisis? Or is it just something that's always been there and the establishment, once something's in place, never changes it, right? Look, the establishment, whether we're talking about the U.S. Or whether we're talking globally, their heads are exploding right now, right? Because they love nothing more than status quo, right? Being comfortable and being in a position that they can understand and they can predict, and they know that they'll always be in that position. So freezing foreign aid to the degree that President Trump has done now in this short period of time that they've been in office, with the eye towards reviewing the dollars that are going overseas, people should actually be happy. U.S. taxpayers should be happy that that's happening, knowing that some of that aid is wasted, some of it is critical and will be reinstated, and some other needs will probably be identified and will be funded at that point.
Yeah, that has to be just terrifying for these people who are only used to the status quo. They're finally being questioned. They finally, like in that scene in Office Space, have to go in front of the two guys and answer the question, what does it say you do here exactly? And is this a good use of taxpayer money? So what fear do other countries have in this? Like, I can understand the American NGO person, right? But like, what can we do with other countries? What's the effect of that? These freezes of spending.
Yeah, look, I think what it does is a couple of things. It forces some level of transparency, both on the recipient and also the U.S. government, to explain the purpose of the aid, to drill down and talk about it in more detail than they tend to. It will probably, I'm just going out on a limb here and saying in some circumstances, it will help to mitigate corruption that exists in the world of foreign aid, whether it's an NGO, whether it's government to government, whatever it may be, because that definitely exists. There's a lot of money over the years that has gone missing. And whether we're talking about money going to the Taliban, for instance, or going to Gaza, supposedly to help the civilians, and it ends up lining the pockets of the billionaire leadership of Hamas. Whether we're talking about, aid to Africa, where in some of these countries you think, how have they not improved their conditions? Well, it's because a lot of times the despotic leaders are pocketing that money. So I think it will help to mitigate that corruption. But look, some foreign aid, there's no doubt about it. Some of it is crucial, is critical, right? We don't live in a bubble. So nobody should imagine that freezing foreign aid means suddenly we're drawing the curtains around the U.S. and saying, that's it. Everybody else, you're on your own. That's not how this is going to work. And it can't work that way because, the world is too interconnected and there are still elements out there that are hostile to our interests. And there'll be vacuums. If we pull back aid in certain areas to certain countries, the Chinese regime will sweep in there. And they've been making that effort for a couple of decades now.
Yes, great point. Obviously China, but sorry, let me start with this. We kicked off the show talking about the little mini trade war with Colombia that lasted like an hour, that Trump just swatted him around. Yeah. Are there other countries out there, though, that can match Trump and can match the American economy and the American military might in a way that Trump can't just slap him around on a golf course for an hour? Colombia is obviously not one of those. China would be. Are there any other countries out there that we would need to be on the lookout for?
Not really. I suppose in a sense you could argue that we have to be careful with the members of the nuclear club, right? There's always that concern. So we have to be somewhat mindful of the nature of the country we're talking about. How hostile are they to U.S. interests? But there's really nobody else other than the Chinese regime that's got that sort of leverage, and they're still working on it. They've been building or attempting to build significant leverage in Latin America, in Africa, parts of the Middle East. Over the past 20 years in particular, while we've been focused in the U.S. on the global war on terror, we tend to be sort of with blinders on. It sometimes seems the U.S. administration, regardless of which administration, has a hard time multitasking. So all our focus is on the Middle East or counterterrorism. And we take our eye off the ball in Latin America. And then after a few years, we wonder, well, how come we have so many nations down there with governments that are hostile to our interests? Well, it's because we're not paying attention. We're not in there. We're not making an effort, not just dollars, but resources, personnel, strategic thinking.
We got about 2 minutes. Let's do that. I was going to ask you about Saudi Arabia, but in that vein here, locking down our hemisphere. I know we've talked before about the Panama Canal. We understand that. And we see the Belt and Road Initiative of China all through Panama and all over, up in Mexico. There's like Canadian ports in Mexico. It's crazy. How would you like to see this president and Secretary of State lock down our hemisphere tighter?
Yeah, well, look, we've got several issues here, whether we're talking individual countries like Venezuela, Panama, Honduras. The Honduran president, she just spent some time lambasting, President Trump, and the Honduran presidential family has had association and allegations of narco trafficking rumors for years now. So we shouldn't be paying attention to that. But what we have to always do, and I think they're doing it now, and I think President Trump's been clear about this, Marco Rubio's been clear about this, is we evaluate our relationship with each country based on what is in our best interest, because that's what the other countries are doing. We just tend to apologize for it or back away from it somehow over the years, thinking it's a community of nations, right? And if we're just open and generous and non-judgmental, and we don't worry about our own interests, well, the rest of the world will follow. Well, that's a bunch of crap, because that's not how it works. Every nation works in its own best interest. So we need to start from that premise. I think that's what they're doing. And with Latin America, look, it's an incredibly important part of the world. Our trade, our strategic thinking and intelligence, our security. We have to focus on it more. That means we have to devote more serious-minded individuals, more time, more resources, again, not just foreign aid, to develop closer relationships and to ensure that we don't wake up and, oh, look, we've lost another country in Latin America, and now they're aligned with China, or they're aligned with sort of the BRICS nations who are kind of working to establish their own global order.
Yes. I'm so excited, if done well, to have control over our own hemisphere once again. Mike Baker, the great Mike Baker, host of the President's Daily Brief podcast, one of the most popular podcasts in the entire country. Mike, great to talk to you, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you, man. Take care.
Amen. Next time you're riding camels in the desert, I'll be there for you once again. Coming up next, we'll get into more specifics of logistics, what the logistics of this looks like, a potential global trade war, and how to avoid that. It's coming up next right here on The First TV.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
The American Golden Era. Our special today is the global trade war. To get some more in-depth analysis on this, our friend, Ross Kennedy, founder of Fortis Analysis, supply chain and national security expert. Ross, good to talk to you, brother. What are some supply chain or logistical concerns you have about a trade war with a country that could actually throw their weight back on us? We kicked off the show talking about Colombia, right? Now Trump just smacked them around on the golf course for like an hour. No big deal. But there's going to be some trade wars that maybe put up a better fight. So what are some of those concerns you see?
Well, the biggest and most obvious one, of course, is China. However, the U.S. has other very, very, very large trade partners that we interact with really on a daily basis across a wide range of commodities, finished goods, raw materials. The EU, of course, being a very large one as well, but also Canada and Mexico. And so when we take a look at, one obviously is overtly hostile. Canada, Mexico, and the EU kind of exist on various continuums of ally, particularly on economic and trade matters. In the case of EU, we have a lot of security cooperation with them. In the case of Canada, they're part of the Five Eyes. So really part of one of our largest and most important security apparatuses and networks that we have worldwide, and a major source of numerous critical minerals. But the obvious one, of course, is energy. Mexico has emerged in the last 30 to 40 years as a major trade partner, our largest or one of our largest at any given time, primarily because it is a major manufacturing hub that has duty-free imports to the U.S. So it's allowed automakers and steel manufacturers, electronics component, appliances is another big one as well, to be manufactured more or less in our own logistical backyard, but then brought into the United States on a duty-free basis. And of course, all of the economies that have emerged in this role in one way or the other, whether ally or adversary, have benefited enormously from the fact that the United States is a gargantuan demand pool. We import far more than we export, and that is something that President Trump obviously intends to invert that relationship a little bit and turn them into bilateral trade partners more than they have been. In the case of China, you're talking about the country that manufactures 20% of everything in the world, and it's all the way across the largest ocean. To say nothing of the fact that we've had this major adversarial relationship emerge with them in the last decade. We went from allies of a sort economically to frenemies to just outright hostility on the world stage. And so the thing that we have to be very cautious of is balancing very muscular economic hard power. So that's going to be tariffs, that's going to be enhanced oversight on export restrictions and export licensing of dual use and critical things that we do make in the US and that these countries have come to depend on. Very famously and very recently in the last week, it's emerged as far as a geopolitical constraint that the United States has had significant export restrictions on major semiconductor and computer components that are critical to artificial intelligence, as well as advanced computer technology and R&D. We do know for a long time that China has been pilfering this technology. There's not so much a logistical concern there, but if you're going to be able to upscale your economy, move away from manual labor and towards robotics and towards AI-driven data architectures that make businesses more efficient on a cost per goods, on the cost of goods basis, on a cost per unit, being able to ensure that China cannot leverage technology that's designed and or manufactured in the U.S. In its own industrial revolution is a major concern. So what you have here is all of these different geoeconomic blocks of various dependencies, various critical sourcing for very specific things. Brazil with vanadium, copper, and other things that come out of Peru. Colombia is not a major source of oil, but it is certainly a major free trade partner with the United States in the Western Hemisphere. And where some of these countries have major dependencies on the U.S., China does not. And China does have some level of optionality to engage in more robust bilateral trade with these countries, or in the case of the EU, with an economic zone. So we have to balance, on the one hand, muscular economic strength with not getting too far out over our skis too fast and cutting ourselves off of critical goods and critical manufacturing technologies that we depend on. So I think so far President Trump has shown an admirable amount of restraint in terms of as-applied policy when it comes to trade. But Colombia certainly did get a taste of what it means to be in a more subservient role in relationship to the U.S. And deciding that, after 20 years of 30 years of relying on diplomacy and economic and security cooperation with the U.S., now their socialist president has decided that he didn't want to cooperate. Trump showed him exactly what the stick is if they don't take the carrot. So balancing all of these things and weighing them one against the other in these various economic zones and clusters that we do business with is certainly priority one, it seems to be, for him.
Let's work backwards, but I do want to end on Mexico and Canada because that's super interesting. We learned during COVID how reliant we are on China for things like our medicines or masks and stuff like that, and how we just don't make these things in America anymore, and how crazy it is. Like Alexander the Great would be like, you guys are out of your minds. Like, how ridiculous are you people to let the enemy be in charge of so much of your critical things? And then I was talking to the new senator from Montana, and he made the point that we make most of our ships, or at least military ships, in Korea. And you look at a map and you're like, oh geez, if we go in war with China, that's a horrible idea. Like that, we're not gonna get any more ships. Can you think of any other, whether it be minerals, like rare earth minerals, or resources, or things that we make around the world that you find to be unwise?
Well, we have certain, particularly in advanced, minerals that are required. Rare earths, of course, are famous now and somewhat familiar to people, but your magnetic and metallic classes of minerals that are, absolutely essential or indispensable. So that's going to be things like antimony, that's going to be things like vanadium, tantalum, things that just really, by and large, don't exist, or to develop those resources from the pockets of pockets of availability that we have in North America, mostly up in Canada. In the case of a lot of these things up in the far north, we are in our own way from a regulatory side, being able to extract them, particularly on things like environmental reviews, impact on local populations, watersheds, air quality. So being able to rapidly exploit those minerals, get them out of the ground, get them refined, get them into the alloys, and get them into the critical components that we have, particularly for electronics, things like satellites. You've got an awful lot of these dependencies that we have that are scattered across, and the United States has not done a great job of managing its critical strategic materials and energy stockpiles that we have, most of that being managed by the Defense Logistics Agency. That is a big topic for someone like Senator Fetterman, where DLA does an awful lot of its work in Pennsylvania, but you also have major management offices for DLA in Virginia and in Ohio. So we've built this kind of very sprawling network of sourcing and management and warehousing and stockpiling, and kind of scattered the authorities and scattered the stockpiling activities around. That's where I see a lot of the biggest challenges are going to be for the intermediate term, at least, is going to be not on energy. We have sufficient energy stockpiles. We just need to get out of our own way and be able to, as President Trump said in his inauguration speech, drill, baby, drill. We have vast amounts of natural gas that we can exploit very readily. It's hard to move a lot of that natural gas and some of these other energy products to market because of, as it stands right now, the Jones Act. We just don't have enough vessels, particularly LNG carriers, to be able to move natural gas from where it's produced unless we do it in pipelines or in rail cars. But that's primarily done in pipelines. Being able to support a three-coast strategy with the Pacific Coast, Atlantic Coast, and Gulf Coast for movement of energy flows will be a huge thing. Getting environmental reviews significantly shortened. Right now, it takes 2 to 3, even 4 years to complete a lot of environmental impact assessments to be able to get a new energy or mining project off the ground. We have to get that shorter. We've got to get that down to 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, because it is incredibly expensive to stand up extraction and refining operations. When you've got 3-4 years of CapEx and investment that are at risk in the event that you fail an environmental review or you're continuously delayed. So that's where we're in our own way. There's very, very little that we actually can't do ourselves. And I think that's why you're seeing President Trump signal very loudly and in some cases take direct steps towards reducing the impact of government oversight and the delays and the capital cost associated with getting these projects online as a de-risking strategy. It's not that we are wholly dependent on these countries, it's that we've allowed ourselves to become dependent on manufacturing, refining, and energy operations in other countries because we wanted to have our cake and eat it too. We wanted to pretend that we were doing a lot of good for the environment while simply shipping these things from half a world away. If we reduce that, then we have very significant exposure reduced down to very, relatively minimal exposure, and we will ignite an industrial revolution in the U.S. I do believe that is the long-term strategy that the president is taking here by balancing trade, reducing regulations, reducing costs, reducing taxes on the U.S. side, while concurrently increasing tariffs and really increasing the amount of review that we do on a lot of these countries where we've looked the other way for a long time on labor and environmental abuses. We're shifting a lot of that burden back to ourselves because President Trump believes, as I believe, that the United States absolutely has it in us to do this again, to do an industrial revolution 2.0, to do what we did in the late 1930s and 1940s and rebuilding the arsenal of democracy. That is, I think, the intention here. I do believe it will work. So long as the American people get on board and recognize that the only people standing in between us and an economic agenda that really challenges the world and reasserts American authority, the only thing in the way of that is ourselves.
Yeah, well, I'm encouraged. You got me fired up. Ross Kennedy, he's our supply chain national security expert, founder of Fortis Analysis. Ross, good to talk to you, brother.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, man. Keep it up. Coming up next, we have our panel, 2 economists. We'll talk about what a 25% across-the-board tariff could look like and could feel like. We'll do that next right here on the First TV. Spread the word.
Look, I look at tariffs, they are an economic tool. That's it. They're an economic weapon, depending how you use it and why you use it and stuff like that. And, people argue, is it inflationary and non-inflationary? I would put in perspective, if it's a little inflationary, but it's good for national security, so be it. I mean, get over it. National security trumps a little bit more inflation, but I think the question is how they get used. Can they be used to bring people to the table? Yes. Is there some unfair trade? Yes. Is there some state-owned subsidies? Yes. Is the president going to use that way in his team? Yeah.
Very good clip there. So I'm new to this tariffs game, I'll admit. I really cut my teeth on Milton Friedman, and he would be very disappointed in me for even entertaining such an idea. But I'm starting to see the light with it. Tiana Lowe Doescher is here, columnist at the Washington Examiner, and Carrie Sheffield here. She's a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Voice. Thank you both for being here. Carrie, we'll start with you. Are Trump's tariffs, and I think there's lots of different proposals of tariffs, but he also talked about just like 25% across the board. Is that a good idea?
Well, I agree with you. I'm coming from the school of thought of, yes, I'm all about Milton Friedman, big fan of him, free markets. And what I think Trump has woken myself and a lot of people up to is the fact that we don't have free markets. And when your opponent or your trading partner is not treating you fairly, then unfortunately, you've conditioned them to treat you unfairly until you stand up for yourself. And that's really what Trump is doing by exerting these tariffs to say, for example, Germany, you're not going to accept certain imports. You're not accepting our automobiles or whatever the product. Well, then we're going to put a tariff because you, by not accepting our products, that's essentially a tariff against us. And so it's really a negotiating tactic is what it is. And so I think it's an important reframing at this point to say that these tariffs can be used as tools in order to lower the tariffs for everybody. And I think that is something that I can get behind.
Yeah. Tiana, what do you think? Are these tariffs a good idea?
With all due respect to Jamie Dimon, it's a mistake to think of these tariffs and especially the negotiations as an economic tool when really they're a diplomatic tool, right? Tariffs as an end goal of economic policy are highly inefficient. The risk isn't really inflation, but rather capping economic growth because you reduce that comparative advantage of if it's cheaper for Mexico to produce avocados, let's import the avocados so we can focus on producing computer code and AI. Rather, the tariffs as a means to an end are a highly effective tool, right? We already saw that with the Colombia case. But more importantly, look at Mexico and Canada, right? Exports to the U.S. from both Mexico and Canada comprise about 1/3 of their entire economic output. Now, if, let's say, these 25% tariffs actually went into effect, it would absolutely harm Americans, not just American consumers, but also, let's say, the 1/5 of all jobs in Texas that are predicated on free trade with Mexico. Mexico is now our number one trading partner. However, if you're taking the gamble that, look, your ability to access our markets are 1/3 of your entire economic output, that means you must crack down on fentanyl crossings through the southern border, illegal immigration, which is becoming a very big problem from Canada because they don't do the requisite visa enforcement. That's a very wise tool. And look, I don't think Milton Friedman would be as opposed to the strategy if my assumption is correct that Trump is using this as a tool, especially if you look at the fact that of the $4 trillion that the U.S. brought in fiscal year 2023, about half came from individual income taxation. It's not a mistake to think that it's better to have a consumption tax because income tax punishes earnings, whereas consumption taxes punish consumption and incentivizes savings. That's not a bad thing. And it also incentivizes work. The idea, though, where it is misguided is when Trump talks about tariffing our allies. Like we do not want to tariff Taiwan and Singapore as we go into this trade war, as we go into not just the trade war, but also the AI Cold War, our modern day space race. We don't want to alienate our allies. But if we use it to say, Germany, get up your defense spending to 3%. As part of your requisite dues and NATO's. That's not a bad thing.
Okay. I want to get back to the consumption tax, Tiana. That was really interesting. But I want to get Carrie. Carrie, what do you think about that use of the tool? And one of the lines we use all the time is from Thomas Sowell. He said there's no such thing as solutions, only trade-offs. So how would Trump and his advisors and you balance the trade-offs of, well, geez, maybe this thing actually might be a little more expensive for Americans if we do this, but it's more important because X, Y, Z. How do we think through that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Sol's obviously right, as he always is, that the trade-off of being able to create and manufacture goods here in the United States, whether it's not having to rely for our medical supply chain on China, for example, that's important. That's a national security issue as well, as we saw during COVID. I don't want to be reliant for my medical supplies on China. Especially during an emergency. And so there are all different things and trade-offs that we are considering. And certainly when it comes to the idea that, Trump was elected in part to bring or revive a manufacturing base, I think that that's an important goal. I do think that, I agree with what Tiana said as far as like, we have a global economy, and if you can focus on what you're best at the lowest price. This is, if for some manufacturing things, we don't have the competitive advantage, but partially why at this point is because we don't have the proper tariffs or sort of the trade levels that would make it economically efficient. And so if through the tariffs, if the tariffs are a means to an end, the tariffs for their own sake, that is something that, again, the sort of like never Trump world doesn't understand. Trump doesn't like tariffs for their own sake. He likes it because there's a purpose, and that purpose is to revive making things in the United States, but doing it in a way that is cost effective and using the tariffs as a tool so that we are competitive and that we're being able to, have the leverage that we used to have. And that's what I love about Trump is that when you're talking about America first, it doesn't mean that he wants to invade or it's not about being aggressive to other people, but it's about saying you can't take advantage of me anymore. And part of that is tariffs.
Yeah, that's right. Tiana, you mentioned this consumption tax. So Trump has this line where he says, there's the days of taxing Americans to enrich other nations is over. It's time we tax other nations to enrich Americans. Something like that. And I'm for to go back to Milton Friedman again, he's like, I'm for getting rid of any tax for any reason in any way. And I want to get rid of the income tax so badly. I'm so sick of these Republicans thinking that they're tough because they're extending the current tax cuts. Like, that is so not good enough. We need to lower taxes way more. And Trump is throwing out this idea of getting rid of the income tax even and replacing it with tariffs. I've heard other analyses say that that's not nearly enough money would be brought in to continue to fund the government in any way whatsoever. I've heard the number that's would cover 5% of our spending or something if we taxed, if we got our money through tariffs. But Trump does have this external revenue service. Anyway, what do you think about a consumption tax and a tariff tax to decrease the income tax?
I mean, as a paradigm, consumption taxes are always a vastly smarter idea than income taxation, period. Whatever that consumption tax looks like, it varies, right? You could have a pot tax, you could have a VAT tax. VAT taxes are popular because you can make them very progressive. Don't tax essential foods, maybe tax, clothing at 5% and tariff yachts at 100%. Sure, there's a smart way of doing it. The issue is just that Donald Trump really likes to style himself, especially in the second term, after William McKinley, because William McKinley also presided over a defense of that strong U.S. dollar against William Jennings Bryan, the Cross of Gold. Go back, it's wonderful history, and Trump knows it well. And also tariffs. The difference is that at the time, the U.S. had close to no mandatory spending. We spent $6.7 trillion last year. The majority of that went to mandatory spending, and it's something like 4/5 of that spending went to mandatory entitlements plus pre-existing interest payments on our $36 trillion national debt. So the amount that you would have to just tariff, it wouldn't even be able to compensate for that loss in income tax, because at a certain point, people respond to incentives. And as those tariffs get more expensive, more people just bite the bullet and purchase from home or purchase from non-tariff nations. But again, as a paradigm shift, not a bad thing. The issue is that Donald Trump doesn't want to go after entitlements. And without going after the entitlements, without so much as even, let's just say increasing the retirement age to 70, you're looking at a 23% benefit cut to Social Security in the next 8 to 9 years. So that's not even going into the issue of, do we transition to a consumption tax? But look, I think more progress has been made in educating the public and understanding the difference between these things. Because look, most people don't study Sowell, they don't study economics, and it's our job as economic commentators to educate people in understanding that a system that punishes you for earning more is less efficient than a system that incentivizes saving, investment, and that's what a consumption tax-based system is.
Yeah, very good. All right, Tiana, Lowe, Doescher, a columnist at the Washington Examiner, and Carrie, Sheffield, senior policy analyst, Independent Women's Voice. Ladies, thank you very much for your insight today. Grateful.
Thank you.
All right, good stuff there. Eyes opening up to the use of tariffs as a tool. Can Trump use this to not only prevent trade wars, but prevent war as well? It's all part of the American First agenda. We'll see in this new American Golden Era. Thanks for being here. Mike Slater, First TV. Spread the word.